once everything is done and signed and sealed, the only way to stop it is to strap yourself to the building or the tree, and even that will only work for so long.
As a community, we need to start having conversations together that matter. Who are we now? Who were we then? And who are we going to be in the future? Let's slow down to think and discuss. This is Afterthought. Well, it's an honor to have you, and I'd love for us to start with just talking a little bit about the person, Jim O'Brien. Your background, when did you first move to Windermere? What drew you to it? Tell us about your upbringing and all that sort of thing. Give us the details about Jim O'Brien, the man.
All right, I'll do my best. So I was born and raised in West Palm Beach, Florida, so Floridian, all through and through. My grandparents on both sides came down to Florida from Ohio and Connecticut, with the great Pratt & Whitney wave, and then they made their way to Lake Park and Riviera Beach in South Florida. So that's where I grew up. My father is a firefighter. My mom was a housewife. She passed away a couple of years ago. And my dad still lives in Stewart. I have two brothers. My brother Jeremy, who was a law enforcement officer. He's disabled right now and has been for quite some time. He got a kind of a rare syndrome that caused him to have a lot of complications. My younger brother Jason is a battalion chief for Palm Beach Gardens Fire Department, which is a really booming metropolitan fire department now, an area now that was originally started by my grandfather. They started the fire department in a building with a couple of apparatus that they built themselves as a volunteer fire department, and the fire department still sits behind the headquarters fire department to this day. Moved to Windemere in 2008. My wife Kristen, with my son Jacob and my daughter Emily. Jacob just turned 21. Emily is 16, so she's got her independence now, and she's driving around. We moved to Windermere. Kristen brought me to see Windermere probably sometime around 2005. I remember driving through thinking, wow, really amazing houses, but these dirt streets, they're really going to get your car dirty. I came from South Florida where, you wanted always to have a nice clean car. Right. And kind of your pride. And but I quickly found the magic, and we decided to move. South Florida was changing a lot. And it wasn't the same community that I'd grown up in. I knew we were going to have to make a move, so we talked about do we move to Palm Beach Gardens or to Martin County or someplace like that. But with Kristen growing up in Windermere, and we were spending more and more time up here anyways with her parents, and it became a really clear decision that Windermere was a place we wanted to live. So at that point, it just became, hey, how do we get here? And right. That's what we worked towards.
Your wife was from Windermere?
Yes, Kristen grew up in Windermere. Her dad bought a lot in Windermere in 1967. He was an Orlando firefighter at that time, and he bought a lot and built a house, so she was able to grow up there, and that was a pretty special time, and really went into that small town charm and a great time, raising families. So
right.
That was a really good.
Where you grew up in South Florida, was it similar, the community, to Windermere at all? Was it totally different?
So it was for a time, as I grew up, my memories are we rode our bikes everywhere, by ourselves, and it was a great community. Still is a great community in many, many ways. We go down, I see it, I visit. I've loved what they've done with so many other places. Mm-hmm. I think what happened is, as those communities grow really rapidly, you just get a lot of people, you get a lot of attention. You get, I always joke that when I moved here, I had to learn how to drive. Because, if you let somebody in front of you in South Florida, the person behind you is going to be pretty angry at you. Mm-hmm. Here, if I'd be driving along and Kristen says, let that person in. I'm like, you can't do that. And, I quickly found out that that was the right way to do and the right thing to do. And
different rules of engagement.
Exactly. There are, I'm like, they were just different, right? I can follow them, just give them to me. I think the difference, there was that kind of difference. So it was kind of like a decompression. It was, I think we
Over
just
small town.
Yeah, it was a small town, much more small town feel here. And that was a big change. I had to adjust to that to some degree, but it was a nice adjustment to make, and something that I enjoy a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like when you're in those bigger cities, like in a lot of cities in South Florida, our communities, you don't get held accountable as much. If you don't let that person in, there's a very good chance that that person, and they go, "Hey, thanks a lot, Austin, for not letting me in earlier."
That's right. I saw you, man.
Yeah, exactly. But when you don't know anybody, that's why, like in big cities like New York City, it has a stereotype of people are just not too nice to each other. Nobody knows each other. Nobody's being held accountable for their actions in public. So that is definitely a difference, and I think a very good difference.
We might talk about it later too, but the same's true in government, small government especially. So,
yes.
I always say that, we may walk in, we may disagree in this room, but we walk out, you're still my neighbor. So,
yeah, exactly.
It's something that is really special about small government, I think.
Right, yeah. I could throw a rock at your house. We're so close. Don't make me do it.
Exactly.
So where did you go to school? And then, tell us a little bit about that.
So I went to school. I went to school at Florida Atlantic University down in Boca Raton in the late, this be 87. So graduated with a bachelor's in social work. I had an interest in counseling. Later went to get, a couple years later, went to get my master's degree. I got a master's in education and counseling psychology. And those were things that I put to work pretty rapidly in the nonprofit field. I worked with Goodwill Industries down in West Palm Beach, as well as the Goodwill Industries here in Central Florida. Both fine organizations, large nonprofit, taught me a lot of business savvy, a lot of business skills. People think that, you run a nonprofit, it just runs itself and you don't have to worry about money. Well, those are the nonprofits that go out of business. You really have to, I always tell people nonprofit it's a taxing designation. It doesn't mean you don't have to run the business. And I think a lot of the great people that I know that run great nonprofits in Central Florida will agree with that.
Yeah.
So after that, worked at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society for a period of time. I worked at the Community Foundation. So I've done some philanthropy and things like that. Then I had a really interesting opportunity to work with the state of Florida to provide case management services for hurricane recovery for all those folks that were impacted by Hurricane Irma, which was a significant amount of people. So we ran the largest disaster case management program ever in the state of Florida from 2000, really early 2018 to just before the kind of the start of the pandemic in March. And that kind of spiked my interest in doing more of disaster recovery services, and that's kind of where I landed with a private company that we now serve as a disaster consultant for several municipalities, and we work with them to help them get all of their FEMA reimbursement and all of their recovery projects funded, so they're made whole after major disasters.
Tell us a little bit about your journey to the mayorship. Before that, you were on the town council.
I was.
Tell us about that history.
So I started on the town council in 2011. I served on a committee in town from 2010. I pretty early, I knew I wanted to participate at some level. We had some challenges and some struggles in town. I was a little bit of the guy who, the crazy guy who would watch the school board meetings on the public access channel. Yeah. I was always fascinated by government, by the process. My grandfather on my mother's side served as a Lake Park city commissioner. I think that was in my mind somewhere. The option and the ability to do that. So one of the advantages too of coming to a place like West Orange is that you can participate, even if you're an outsider like I technically was. And, and that's something in Windermere. You have to, every conversation starts with, my name is so-and-so. I've lived in Windermere for so-and-so many years. So I was at a little bit of a disadvantage, but I
think that's how it is in all the municipalities of West Orange.
I think you're probably right.
Very much so.
And that's a good thing because it means something here, right? I mean, it means that, hey,
I'm
an established person. I've given time, I've given talent, and treasure.
That's right.
You know, I
And
care about what goes on
Back
here.
to that accountability.
right,
Years of accountability on the record.
So so there was a lot of that. So, but what happened so back to like the really great thing about that was I felt that you could actually enter in, make a difference, and become someone that could benefit the community and give you that opportunity. That was while there were certain established players and all of that, and still are, and always will be. Being a little smaller, you're able to kind of earn your way in. So that's really what I work towards. Saying like, hey, I'm serious about this. I really care. I had seen some of the mistakes that I felt were made in South Florida, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't make those here. That was really my initial impetus to get me started into wanting to run for council. Now, my father-in-law, who lived in Windemere, I told you, Roger, he's like, oh, don't do that. And I don't know if that was for him or for me. I'm not sure. He loved everybody. He always had time for everybody. Right. There's a bench downtown that has his name on it. It's because he would sit on that bench and talk to anybody who would sit down and give you the history, the time, the weather, whatever it took. Politics, no taboo subjects. But I took that first venture in 2011, and it was pretty contentious. It was probably one of the, if not the most contentious elections that I know of in the town of Windermere.
What made it so?
So a lot of what made it contentious was there were issues underlying right below the surface that were starting to bubble up. Issues in terms of leadership, issues in terms of what was happening at the police department, accountability. And people were starting to ask tough questions, good questions, and some of the answers weren't so great. Right. And I think that and that was not the reason I ran. When I first started, those issues, certainly they were there, but they were not the major force. But what happened with the arrest of Tiger Woods and all the things that came to light throughout, that really amped up everything. It made it quite contentious in some ways, but it also made it an important election. So
these things were making huge headlines.
They were making national headlines. Yeah,
exactly.
It's not so great
Even
when you move to a little
local.
town. Like, hey, I'm moving to this little town because it's Mayberry, and then my friends are calling me and they're like, "Why are you on CNN?"
Exactly. Yeah, that was a wild.
And
time.
now so that was a negative, for sure. But I think the positive that came of that was the real emphasis and effort to make sure that, hey, we now have some work to do. We're clearly lacking in some areas, policies, procedures, hiring. Our police department was severely, almost every police officer had to be terminated because they weren't properly background checked and all of those things. And there was, poor hiring practices, lack of professionalism, lack of standards, and again, lack of leadership. We had to tackle those things right away. I wanted to go build fountains and parks for kids and things that I thought were fun. Right. Instead, what we did for 2 years initially after that first election was hired a new town manager, hired a police chief, hired new firms to make sure we had the proper professional services that we need. We rebuilt policies, we rebuilt procedures, all the back of house things that you need to be able to do things correctly.
That was your first 2 years.
That was my first 2 years. So the election, like I said, the election was pretty contentious, and I won, with a nice margin, which I felt was excellent. I think part of it was I was, married into an established family as well. That helped a lot, but also I think that there was a desire to have maybe a little bit of, maybe somebody who wasn't betrothed to everything as as it was at the moment. There was a hunger, I think, for change in some ways. We knew we were going to have to make some change.
You were seen as kind of a reform candidate, perhaps?
Perhaps, it certainly wasn't my intent. My intent was, I think if reform is just to make sure that we do things the proper way, we make sure they're transparent, we make sure we have what we need, and we're building a foundation to not only preserve the great things about the community, but make sure we're equipped to be there 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about it before. You're a big transparency guy through and through.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a big part of who you are as mayor and council before that. So I guess it was perfect timing because that's what Windermere needed at the time.
I think so, and I think that really bought a lot of credibility for the entire process that we were going through. It wasn't easy in terms of, there were people who weren't convinced that everything was, I don't like to, I don't mean to imply that everything was broken, but there was a lot of things that were broken and needed to be relooked at.
Yeah.
But over time, and with a lot of help from volunteer committees and people who were really committed to making the community better, we rebuilt all those things. We looked at the charter. We looked at, like I said, all those policy and procedures, how we handle public records, where public records are stored, how they're stored, all of those things, and then making sure we had the right staff in the right places. And then with the police department, early on there was a push to say, hey, do we want to contract out our police department to Orange County sheriffs? That was an option that we looked at. The Sheriff Demings at the time was incredibly generous with us and allowed us to use several of his captains to help run our police department while we went through this transition. Yeah, time. Because at this point, the former police chief was in jail, so there was a lot of really big issues, and we wanted to make sure those were nipped in the bud and that we went forward in a good way. We talked about, kind of contracting it out, and there was a big pushback from the community. We really didn't want that. They didn't, the reality is the level of service was not going to be anything like we had become used to in terms of presence. But I think also, my point was then, okay, if we're going to commit to this, we have to be all in. And then we actually at that point in time made a commitment to accreditation.
Mm-hmm. You had some folks that maybe wanted to just throw it all out and go to Orange County, but instead of actually fixing the problem. And I'm very glad that you guys did fix the problem, because one thing I do know about the current police department is that you have an incredible chief, Chief David Ogden, who I know, and I don't know if I know many people that have ethical standards as high as him. So the department seems to be in a tremendous place right now. So tell us about this wonderful accomplishment with this accreditation.
So one of the things, like we talked about, we worked and set that goal towards accreditation. And at the time, that was a pretty pie in the sky. I mean, we were like in the ashes, and we're like, yeah, we're going to be accredited, which is...
What exactly does that mean, though, to the folks to understand?
So there's a National Board of Accreditation. To be an accredited police department, you have to meet the standards. And the standards are quite intense, and they deal with things like professionalism, evidence, certifications, all the way from how you treat ammunition and when you change your guns and the type of radios that you have and your dispatching abilities. Mm-hmm. But through steady commitment, we were able to, over time, begin to prepare those standards. We had the right tools, the right vehicles, the right training, the right staffing levels, the right leadership. Mm-hmm. And we were able to start to begin and put into place everything you needed for accreditation. Eventually, we built a brand new facility that we just finished last year. It was a little over $5 million investment by the community. Now our budget is, about $8 million. So that gives you a little glimpse into, the horsepower required to do something like that, right? But again, that was all about having the right tools, not only for our police department, but for our administrative staff and our public works staff, so that they have the tools they need to do the best job possible. Mm-hmm. And it's not only about doing the best job possible today, but when these folks are ready to go somewhere else or do something different, we want to be able to, as a town, attract the right talent into our town to make sure that we have a great community. And, it really just is all about that forward-looking investment. So yes. We had some cool little nuances in that, Our charter doesn't allow the council just to go out and borrow money. We actually had to do a referendum to have the police station funded. and to allow us to go out and get the dollars and cents needed to build a new facility. So I invite anybody who's interested to come over and take a look and schedule a tour. I think you'll be impressed. It's what we need. It's what we need for the future. It's what we need for today. It's not overboard. It's not grandiose. But it fits as what we need and allows us to do things right. Definitely with a nod to the past, and a little bit of a futuristic and technologically smart building, and it's efficient. But the best thing about it is it's a building, for the entire community, and it'll be something that allows our town to move forward for the next 50 years. That's important.
Yeah, and you mentioned the past. Let's talk a little bit about
Sure.
the history of Windermere. Tell us just, a little broad stroke overview of Windermere's history.
So the town of Windermere is very, very interesting. It's we're about to have our 100-year anniversary next year. We're going to put together a committee to plan some great events and some good tributes to that. So it has a pretty long history. Started off pretty much as a small fishing village. It's surrounded in water by all sides pretty much with the 13 chain of lakes of Lake Butler. So the Lake Butler chain of lakes, they're a pristine lake, and that's a great designation. It's a designation that's reserved for only the highest quality, cleanest lakes in the state of Florida. This allows us, a lot of great recreational and opportunities, as well as a lot of beauty. We have a lot of lakefront throughout the town. We try to make those areas parks as well as private residential lakes and lots. So from a small fishing village, it stayed that way quite some time, up until really Martin Marietta, Lockheed, and Disney came. So as Central Florida grew, so did Windemere. Originally, kind of a funny anecdote is Kristen tells me that her grandfather, they wanted to buy a lot on the lake. And at the time, Windemere was way too far out, and her grandmother would not live this far west. So they bought some property on Stark Lake, where they lived. But I think over time we'll see that the place to buy the lakefront, because it was the same exact price. They could have had lakefront in Windermere or lakefront on Stark Lake.
Yeah.
So at the time, that was all the rage was to live in that area. But my father-in-law, he picked correctly in the town of Windermere, and those property values have really skyrocketed. And a lot of that is due to, the unique footprint of the area. It keeps us small. We're lake locked, and there's really only a couple ways in and out. So, and then just the beauty of the lakes and the surrounding area. So, with Disney coming in and some of the companies more towards West Orange, a lot of the executives found that it was a good place to build and buy. And they set up their homes, and then it really began to kind of take off there. So from the 60s on, it's really kind of been a steady growth. There's really no property within town that is not built on. So what we see now are people purchasing maybe what we would call, or what I would call, like a regular size home, and then they're taking those down and putting up something that they would like to build. Some of them are a little on the big side for my taste, because we like to keep that small town charm.
Right.
But I think that pretty vibrant, and a lot of new growth and development, but all pretty much within the kind of the narrow confines. We've annexed a few places throughout the history. We annexed the Willows. Some of the property on the north side. We had a new development come in not too long ago. It was a little controversial, but I think we were able to.
What made it controversial?
So I think number one, it was a new development,
Right.
And there had not been a new development in quite some time in town. So that was a little controversial. The lots were a little smaller than they would be in other places in town. But we were able to kind of work through those things. And I think that, I actually credit that development, Estancia, with helping kind of teach council and staff as well how to use that transparency and use the opportunity for public input into shaping new projects throughout town. Because if you, some people don't know, but 15 years ago when Kevin Azus wanted to build a big, huge development downtown, there was an outpouring of contempt and no way, you're not going to do that. Tons and tons of pushback. Thank goodness, because I think that history shows us that we would have probably ended up with something half built and could have been a real disaster for our town. But I think that was just that began the whole movement of nothing new, right? There was that feeling that nope, we're going to be really cautious, we're going to preserve, we're not going to allow any progress, and any change is bad. So, there's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't really allow you to grow in a way that communities need to tweak and change to stay relevant and to stay up to date. So, we looked at that opportunity as a way to show that, hey, we can do new projects. Everyone can have public input. That's one of the greatest things about a small community like ours. You come to a council meeting, you sign up, you get your 3 minutes, and you can provide a lot of input. There's a lot of access. My cell number's on everything. Exactly. So, but what we've learned is that even that's not enough, right? So we have to do more of that. So we do door hangers for every project to keep people informed so they know what's going on. It's a bit of a two-way street. We have a lot of public input meetings, and I encourage people always to be like, hey, let's be solution based. We know there's challenges, right? Let's not just come and talk about the challenges. Let's talk about how we surmount those challenges and we do something that works. Right. And then also, so a lot of times I hear like, hey, it's not my role, it's not my job to stay up with the agendas and what's happening in government. And what I encourage people all the time is it 100% is your job, because if this passes and you don't like it, you're going to be back, but there's nothing to do at that point. Right. The time to change it is the time that it's being formed. And so it is worthwhile to look at those agendas, whether you live in New York City or whether you live in Windemere.
And it is very impressive. You see all these community meetings through the municipalities and even Orange County. And that's probably the greatest example. You have meetings for communities that are really representing thousands of people that'll be effective. Maybe 12 people show up. They speak and their voice is heard.
Absolutely.
It's very powerful, the voice of the people. A lot of people don't realize that. Too many people are paying attention to Fox News and CNN and duke it out. But in reality, right here in your community, you can make a huge impact on what's happening in your most immediate area. How many residents are in Windermere?
So there's a little over 3,000 residents in our municipal boundaries. So the town of Windermere itself, or Windermere proper as we like to call it, is a little over a mile square. Okay. So the town itself with the 34786 area code, that's the town of Windermere. So we're not large. Like I said, we have about an $8 million budget. It's about 10 right now due to the ARPA funds that are in there, and those are earmarked for some special projects with water and drainage. But yeah, no, we're a small community.
So I've heard the phrase West Windermere and East Windermere. Now, in the context of the people that are saying that, when they say West Windermere, what they're really talking about, it's the unincorporated Orange County, but the postal office, the U.S. Postal Service, has the zip code associated to Windermere. Isn't that correct?
That is pretty correct. And so the old timers will say there's Windermere and there's Windermere, and it's but the zip code itself covers a really, really large area.
Right.
But the town itself again is quite small, and not a week goes by that I don't get a nasty email or a phone call from somebody who's complaining about something that I didn't do for traffic or I didn't alert them, and you'd be so surprised to realize how many people live in those other areas and don't realize that I'm not their mayor or that they don't live in the town of Windermere.
Phone number. Sorry.
That's right. I'm like, here you go.
That's funny. Yeah, a lot of misunderstanding there. So tell me a little bit about your role as mayor. I understand that you are one of the few mayors in Orange County that actually doesn't have a vote. How does that really work? I think you're a tie-breaking vote. Tell us a little bit about the dynamic of your mayorship.
So it's correct. So in Windemere, as maybe not so surprising, we do things a little differently in terms of that. So we have a council of 5 with a mayor, and the mayor doesn't have a vote. And that is kind of rare. That's part of our town charter. My role is as mayor itself is for guidance and signing authority, and we're not a strong mayorship, so our town manager is really responsible for the day-to-day operations. So Robert Smith and Chief Ogden, those guys are working day to day to make sure that the operations run smoothly, and that's why I feel so strong about having the right people and the right leadership in place, because I place a lot of trust in them. So we work kind of in tandem to do what we do. Gene Spears, former mayor who just recently passed away, great family, and he always told me, he says, Jim, being mayor here was never intended to be a full-time job. So, you're able to give what you can. You have to obviously keep your constituents pleased and make sure things are going in the right direction. But, because I'm blessed with a good staff, I'm able to have the flexibility to be mayor. I've got a great council who, a lot of strong skill sets and a lot of passion. So we've got all the pieces and parts that make that work. So the folks from the Observer always tell me our meetings are a lot of fun, because we really do it right there, because with the sunshine laws and everything, that's where you have to do it, right? So either things have to kind of all be perfect and put together before you get there, and then you can discuss them, or you have to do it in the way we do it, which is we really talk about it. We really hash it out. We really try to convince each other of different things and look at different angles and come up with compromise. But I think that the one thing is that no one can say that they don't have the opportunity to shape something, whether you sit on the council or whether you don't. And you're right. A few people can really make a difference. Those people who show up and put their input in, they're heard, and it's very, very valuable. I think the one thing that I see that surprises me sometimes is, if you want something and need something from the council and it's important to you, a lot of times people take an adversarial tack. And I think that's kind of a byproduct of where we are as a country, perhaps right now.
CNN versus Fox News.
It's always surprising to me. Like, hey, if you really need something from this council, how about coming, asking, explaining why you need it, why it's best, and how it suits the community, how it's going to meet your needs.
You attract more flies with honey.
Yeah, and say, hey, can I answer any questions, rather than say kind of locked and loaded that everybody's against you.
They remind you that there's an election coming up.
That's right.
There's a lot of that going on.
There is a lot of that going on, and it pains me, because what I always try to teach the young people of the community is that I've never seen young people come to council and ask for something and have it denied. I want them to know that you actually can shape this. You can change it. You can hold these positions. You don't have to be, I'm evidence that you don't have to be a genius. You just have to have a lot of passion, not be afraid to do the work, and surround yourself with good people. Right. I think that's the key.
Yeah, and I hope that more people start to see that and realize that, because it's so critical. And with regard to city management, strong government, I think that's how all the municipalities in West Orange are now. And a lot of people don't realize that either. But you guys do make a lot of the very important decisions, including property taxes.
Absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, your millage rate, your property tax, is 3.7425. And that's the same it has been since the 2018-19 budget. And that is the lowest in Orange County. So congratulations on the lowest property tax millage rate, which I think would surprise a lot of people, because Windemere is known as an affluent community. So you would think that that's somewhere you'd have high property taxes. You would just kind of associate that concept with that, but it's not the case. It's the lowest in Orange County.
So I think it's interesting, right? And, it's a bit of a dichotomy, as you said. So a lot of folks are super proud about having a very, very low millage rate, right? I think that, we're we're required by state statute to balance our budget every single year. And I think that's good for business, that's good for government, that's good for families. I think that's pretty good advice all the way around. Number one, we want to be really good stewards of the funding that we're provided. The funding that we receive predominantly in the town of Windermere is from property taxes. That's the number one funding for all of our budget. There are some other ancillary items that come in there, use fees, gas taxes, communications taxes, franchise fees, things like that, all the way to town hall rentals. But predominantly, it's the money of hardworking people that live in town. So we're careful. We always try to do the most with the least. But also, I've learned over time that you don't want to do things on the cheap, because that usually comes back and bites you at some point. And I think we did see that.
There's no free lunch.
There is no free lunch. So, like I tell folks, if this isn't how you want it, let's just get it in the budget, and we'll work on it, and we'll do it when we can afford it.
Yeah, and I think that's a testimony to the leadership of the council too, because people do want to pay for things that they value. However, they have to trust the leaders in place to spend that money appropriately. And I think that often when there's a true need, and there's a need for raising taxes or implementing new types of taxes, people might see that need, but they don't trust the leadership in place to handle that new tax or increased tax.
Right.
And then that brings me to the Orange County transportation tax, which I think a lot of people were surprised that it didn't go through. If you will, tell us a little bit about that, how that would have worked in terms of the municipalities.
Sure. So we worked really hard on this, because I think we were all a little bit skeptical when the notion first came about. When I first talked to Mayor Demings about it, pre-pandemic, so 3-4 years ago, we talked about this notion. We knew there was a gap, and I think everyone's initial thoughts, I feel, are like, hey, yeah, there's a gap, but we didn't create the gap. You guys created the gap. But I think when you start to look a little bit more at how things are funded, how transportation and infrastructure is funded, you also had, the rail responsibilities coming up. There's a lot of different pieces and parts. At the same time, you're segueing into these situations where your gas taxes are actually decreasing because you have different types of vehicles. You have vehicles that are more efficient. And so
people are working from home more.
Yeah, and then everybody's working from home on top of that. Exactly.
Yeah,
another
more Elon Musk cars driving around, so there's
correct.
less gas.
Absolutely. So, again, the world changes, so you can't be afraid to zig and zag a little bit.
Right.
But I think what the West Orange community did as a whole, so we had all of our city and town managers work together, all the mayors worked together, we worked with the chamber, we worked with business leaders. We wanted to say, hey, we could talk about this, but we can't be willy-nilly with it. A little bit about what we were saying about, hey, give me the opportunity to improve your community, but we want to trust and know what you're going to do with those dollars.
Right.
So we had some pretty, what's the old phrase, difficult conversations, right?
Sure, yeah.
But we had some pretty specific conversations about, hey, what we needed, how, and what kind of control were we going to have over those funds, because you're taking those dollars from our community. We want to make sure that they get reinvested back into our community. Right. And we certainly want to see traffic improve for the whole entire area, but we had some pretty specific needs in the town of Windermere.
Yeah, and speaking on the issue of traffic, obviously everybody knows that Windermere has, traffic is a topic that's brought up a lot for Windermere. And several years ago, they did an attempt at a mitigation, which I think did help, which was all those roundabouts we see in Windermere. Tell us a little bit about where we're at with traffic concerns in Windermere and what you think we're going to see moving forward.
So absolutely, the roundabouts really did make a difference for the community. Some people forget, I think maybe a little bit conveniently, that was not such a super high supported project. There was definitely some challenges moving that process through. Again, it was a big undertaking, a big investment for the community. It involved the roundabouts, a lot of restructuring of the parking and the downtown facades and what everything looked like. Before it was just four-way stops, which I think as we look today, we're going to realize we're like, wow, four-way stops, we would be dead in the water. There would be no way that we would be able to maintain the charm and character that we have. And part of that is, at that same time or a little bit previous to that, the council was very wise, and they took the roads from the county. They took responsibility for those roads. So it was, again, a little bit of a burden for the community, but it allowed us to control our destiny. And then we're short one roundabout on the north side of Main Street that we would look at as well. Those are things that we think we can make immediate improvements with. Those were the projects that we included in the tax that was put forth by we call it a surtax, a tax, but I mean, it's a tax at the end of the day, but, not all taxes are bad, right?
Well, I think taxes are a necessary evil.
Correct.
Kind of like government itself, as George Washington once said.
Amen.
But but it is necessary sometimes. So do you think that there will be an opportunity to fund those projects without that Orange County transportation tax?
So I do think there is some opportunities. Again, we talk about working in alliance with our partners at the county, and that's one of our goals is to try to make sure some dollars get earmarked for those. We're certainly willing to put skin in the game in town. We want to make those improvements as well. It's probably not something that we can do in the near term just on our own, but I think we've got a solid case in terms of the amount of development that has occurred to the south of us and to the west of us. And the limited paths forward and the limited infrastructure that was there to support those areas, has put kind of an undue burden on our community. And, we only have so much capacity. So I think to enhance that capacity in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't increase the width of the roads, but increases the efficiency of them, is a worthy investment and something that I'll continue to work with all of our partners on to get that done.
All right. So in conclusion, what do you consider to be the character of Windermere, and what do you think is necessary for us to do to preserve that character?
So the character of Windermere, right? This undefinable charm and characterization that we hear a lot about. I'll tell you, it's very, very important, and I'll tell you what I think it is. And I think it even changes over time to some degree as we mature as a town, as our families change. I can remember first moving here and thinking that the perfect example of all the charm and character you'd want to see in the town of Windermere is, my two little kids playing in a mud puddle in the street in their little rubber boots, and it's a great picture that we look at, and it's a snapshot in time, right? It's a little bit of innocence. It's a little bit of small town. But I think as our families evolve and as the area evolves, I look at it a little differently. I think part of it's being small but smart. We want to make sure that we're relevant. We want to make sure that we're equipped for tomorrow, but we do all of that with a look at our past so we don't miss out on things that might really be good for our town tomorrow. But I think the overarching piece of the character of our town is the people, and they're different. They're folks who may have lived there for 80 years. They're folks that may be the CEO of a theme park or what have you. There's a lot of time, a lot of talent, a lot of treasure that go in, and I think that's the key. It's what people give to the community. It's the folks on council that serve. It's the folks on committees that take time from their families to do what makes our town better. Always having those skill sets there, always having someone as a sounding board. So many times you can walk down the street and you walk by house after house and you know that person served on council before you. That person was a mayor before you. Everyone has contributed to kind of make our town what it is today. And I think that is the key to our small town charm. We're mindful of those that came before us to give us this great opportunity to make the best place to raise a family and live in West Orange County.
And a lot of people care a lot about what happens in their communities. One of the things I love about our area, West Orange County, is that there's a lot of passion and pride behind our history and heritage. So you did mention something earlier, how often it's too late for, people get involved, but it's after the fact, after a decision has been made. And that's always tragic. And I see it all the time. You'd see some social media post about some historical building that's about to be bulldozed at 12 o'clock, and then now everybody's upset about it, and it's because they didn't know that it was occurring. They've missed the boat, so to speak. What is your recommendation, and any final words you have for the folks, for people to stay ahead of that, to stay active? How can somebody, a resident of Windermere, stay active in the community and stay on top of these things?
The number one thing I would suggest that folks do is they make sure that they check the town website. We have an app that pushes out information about meetings and what's going on right straight to your phone. So there's really no reason not to be informed about what's happening tomorrow. Take just a little time to read that stuff. I know everybody's on social media, everybody's on Instagram. We're there too, right? Click those links, find out what's happening. Come early, bring solutions, and state your concerns. Do it in a positive way that lets everybody know that this is important. Work with your neighbors. A consolidated voice is always louder than one single voice, and come and participate. I think that it's so valuable. It's so very important and worth your time, because you're right. Once everything is done and signed and sealed, the only way to stop it is to strap yourself to the building or the tree, and even that will only work for so long.
Until Dave Ogden comes and takes you off the tree.
That's right. The time to influence it is early on. And from a council perspective, what we can do is be consistent in our decision making, right? Be consistent, be true to what we all find important, and the folks that elected us to be there and represent them, right? That's another key part of it. So, it should be pretty consistent, and everyone should kind of know the way things are working. We know, for example, if we're going to talk about paving a road in town, it's going to get a ton of public input. And it's that way for a reason, because our residents have said that it's important that we maintain our dirt streets. So, it's important. It's a piece of the character. So you have to hear that and listen to it. Again, whether you maybe agree or not, it's a keystone of how we operate our government. So, yeah, get involved early. Take the time. Don't expect to be spoon-fed. But, what I find is that people who put the time in, people are always more than willing to give them time back. I think where that gets, negated sometimes is, like you say, you come after the fact and you just want to kind of complain about it. But I didn't get to see you during the whole process. And there's so much opportunity. Just take advantage of it.
Well, thank you for your transparent leadership and your bold leadership. I'm very grateful for you taking the time to be here today, and we appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve our town as well.